The way you gain experience is to try new things. But new things can be very unsettling, unnerving, and a massive trigger for your inner critic. You know your inner critic, the voice in your head that starts screaming at you that you're doing things all wrong, the voice that makes you doubt your own judgment. And when you're a new leader with ideas, energy, and passion, the judgy voices in your head can impede your vision for the future. Today's guest is Katie McMillan, Executive Director of the Milton District Health Foundation, just outside Toronto, Canada. She is a former client. Katie and I worked together in a coaching capacity when she was newly appointed as an ED this year. And today on the podcast, we are bringing you just a few of the many lessons she learned in her first year of leadership. We're going to talk about how coaching helped her thrive during the ever-changing seas of the first year of a leadership transition. Welcome, Katie, to the podcast.
Thank you, Jenny. It's so great to be here. Thanks for choosing me.
Oh, my pleasure. And I'm just going to milk the whole ship analogy here for a little bit.
Let's do it.
And yeah, live in this sort of rocky waters or that first year of navigation. And I'll just share with our listeners, the reason I wanted Katie to come on, besides just showing the value of coaching, was really kind of that number 2 to number 1. And not that you were a number 2, you're going to hear more. She will introduce herself about where she was before, but that is a real thing. And I want to kind of normalize that. I know you have worked at the NAC, Katie, the YMCA, you were at St. Mike's Hospital Foundation, spent many years at the ROM, as AVP of their major gifts. So, I don't typically do tons of titles and things, but I wanted folks to know your background. So where were you before Milton?
So immediately before Milton, I was at St. Michael's Hospital Foundation, and I was director of philanthropy there, and certainly was in sort of a number 2 role on the major gifts team. And I think, my whole career, healthcare was sort of the shortest stint in terms of fundraising for me. I was in the arts for close to 20 years. And always in, a leadership role to the extent that, I was, leading teams and doing a lot of heavy lifting for major gifts, but then also in that supportive or, a term that took me a long time to understand what it was, which may sound silly, but managing up a lot to either the head of a foundation or the head of an institution. So I always found myself in that, kind of supporting cast role for leaders at an institution.
Yeah. So when was the inkling that you were ready for more? Because I think a lot of my listeners too are like, I'm good at what I'm doing. I've got this covered. Like, tell me about that itch.
So I think, in my last few years at the ROM, I think I had a bit of a crisis of confidence, and I knew that I needed to move on, and I wasn't sure sort of where I needed to go. And I felt like I had this gap in my resume that I had only ever supported sort of arts institutions and that I hadn't been on the healthcare side of things. And I knew that was probably a direction I wanted to go in. So I went on a bit of a lateral move, a lateral journey so that I could get that experience. And I think I'm somebody who, this is a theme. It's funny the way you kind of described, the judgy voices, right? I'm the only person that holds me back. And so I felt like this was this box that I needed to tick. So I made the lateral move. And while it was great, I could feel this itchiness that I want to be the one making the decisions and I could do it better. I would sit in rooms and I'd be like, why are we doing it this way? I know I can do this. And so then this job was just the right job too. It was the right size. It was the right size team. It was the right size goal. It really felt like it wasn't too drastic a leap for me to manage.
That's awesome. I love that you didn't use the word actually, but the word I translated was ambition. Like it's okay to be ambitious. And I totally get that, sitting in the room going, oh God, if only I could take control or do this way. Right, Katie?
Exactly. And when you're going home at night and the thing that you're kind of running through in your head is like, well, if I was in charge, this is how we'd be doing it. Or having to sort of, diplomatically share your opinion in a way that sort of led people to make the decision you wanted them to make. I kept thinking, no, I just want to make this decision on my own.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. So
Mhm.
you land in this job, and we knew each other. Just to relate to the audience, we knew each other. We connected through a couple things. I think you'd taken one of my major gifts courses or
I did,
something.
yep.
And so when that job happens, you decide that coaching is an important component for you. Tell me more about that. What initially led you to seek coaching as you stepped into that first time leadership role?
I think it was inevitable from the moment that I got the job, and it was that confidence boost that I needed, and I sort of recognized right away that coming into a leadership role, I wasn't going to have the work best friend anymore. I wasn't going to have that person where I could go in and close the door and say, "Oh goodness, I'm really struggling with this. Can we talk it through?" And when you're coming in new, you also don't know all of the players, and I say you don't know who you can trust, and it's not really about the trust. It's just, I knew that I needed to be vulnerable, not to use a buzzword, but I knew I needed to be able to say, I don't know what I'm doing in this situation. I need to talk it through with somebody. So I felt like it was the most crucial investment that I made. And I was nervous about asking the board about making the investment in me. But at the end of the day, I realized everybody wants me to be successful, and this is the one thing I need to be able to do this job, was to have that person to listen, that person to give me suggestions and help me focus, I guess, a little bit too, I will say.
Yeah. Yeah, because there's so much you want to do in that first year. I'd like to pick up on the inviting the board to be partner with you and invest in you. I know that lots of folks would be like, "Oh, I just got the job. Like, how do I do that?" What kept you on track for that, or what were you thinking about that was important when you were pitching to the board?
I picked up on the fact that they were so invested in the recruitment process, and they were really invested in finding the right person for the role, but also for the team. And we talked about it. It was a really good process because we did talk about where I would see some of my gaps. They knew exactly who they were getting. They knew this was my first leadership role. And because it was such an open and transparent process, it was not a difficult conversation to say, I've heard you say that you want to invest in me. This is the investment I need.
Yeah, I love that, and I love the way you built it from a partnership place. That's fantastic, and I think that'll be really valuable for our listeners for that. Thank you, Katie. Yeah.
Thank you, Jenny. You got me through my first year in so many respects.
Oh, I love it. It's funny. Okay, so let's go on to, here's a funny question. What
Okay.
surprised you? Was there anything that surprised you about coaching? Because I think that there's a bit of a wall or a mystique around coaching. What
You
surprised
know
you?
what? I thought about this question actually. It surprised me that you didn't give me any of the answers. And I think, like, I mean, how silly of me. It's funny. I was thinking about it. I was like, oh, I kind of have taken some parenting advice away from this whole journey too. Like, don't give your kids the answers. And it was subtle, Jenny. I would come to you and I would be panicked about something, and you would ask all these great questions, and lo and behold, I had the answer the whole time. You just had to sort of tease it out of me, and you made a lot of connections for me when I had specific questions around. I remember recognition, for example. You set me up with some great folks that I was able to then have conversations with at similarly sized institutions, and that was great. But yeah, you didn't give it away for free, that's for sure.
I love that. I love that. That's awesome. And I'm pleased to hear that because I think just from my side, just for our listeners too, like, coaching is a partnership. One of the things we believe, just to reiterate it again, is people come to us already whole. They're already wonderful, amazing human beings with leadership skills and attributes. And our job as coaches is to support and create a container, Katie,
Mm-hmm.
for what might happen. We're not there to fix people. I'm not in the fixing business.
Yeah.
And we want leaders to be able to walk away from coaching. I mean, probably the best compliment anyone can say to me is I know myself and I can coach myself. But maybe the other one I think a lot about with coaching is now, having had that kind of experience, you get to coach. I'm curious, do you coach your team at all based on, or use some of that language?
I definitely think I do, and I think that's something that I actually needed as a leader, was to also back off and sort of let the team help me and let the team sort of get places and not solve things. So I think I definitely do. I also, it was such a good bonding moment for me and the woman who's sort of my second in command, because we would be talking about things and I'd say, oh, I'll ask Jenny, or she'd say, okay, put that on your agenda for Jenny. And then we would have a debrief after and she'd say, what did Jenny say? And it was always surprising. We would always go, oh, yeah, that was sort of there all along. But it was a really good moment for the two of us because I could impart some of those really honest conversations. And I think, in terms of building trust with your team, it was really important for the two of us.
Yeah, what I also hear is that you were the kind of leader that didn't have all the answers and didn't pretend to have all the answers. That's not what we need now, Katie, in this world, right?
No, it's not. And I think there's something about this industry. How many people say, oh, I fell into fundraising? Anyone listening, chances are, that is going to resonate with you. And so as a result, I find there's a bit of mystery around what we do. And I remember myself being, young, working with the CEO of the National Arts Center at the time and thinking, oh my gosh, I could just never do that job. How does she know what to do? And it's that mystery that I think we have to peel back if we're going to mentor sort of the next generation of leaders, that, you already know all of this. It's all the things you've learned along the way and you've gathered along the way. Yeah.
I love that. I love that transition that you're talking about and acknowledging the learning never stops. Like, I hope, right? That things change. Every time you change a player, the whole landscape changes.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. And I think approaching it from a learning mindset rather than a judging mindset. Like, the judger is, I have to figure this out. The learner is, what's familiar to me? What else can I learn? What else can I add? Sometimes the learner says, get more data points. Sometimes the learner says, I need to reach out to someone. Like, there's lots of things the learner invites that is such a more positive, more holistic, more mentally sound, if I may, right?
Yeah. And I think when you're coming from that standpoint or that mindset, you're actually listening to understand, that old saying, listening to understand instead of listening to respond. And you are more capable of of participating in the conversation, of making better decisions if you're listening and learning.
I love that. So let's take a minute. Maybe you can think of a scenario or a situation around conflict, because I know that as new leaders, that's one thing that a lot of my clients that's the first bump, right? And I wonder, maybe you could share with our listeners pieces of a conflict or a scenario that encountered, how you leveraged coaching, and how I hope you felt like you came to a better conclusion through that. Because that is a key one, right?
It is a key one. And it's funny because I think that it's a good segue to be talking about listening, because I think that's the, piece that really got me through the example that I'm thinking of. And it relates to a volunteer who sort of had a fundamental difference with a set of values that related to some of our governance and audit. And, I had done, it was hard. This was the first time that I was in the position where I had to be the one to have the hard conversation. And, I knew it was coming, and it was sort of because we had already started coaching. It's funny, Jenny, as total aside, as I looked back at the notes from our calls, it was like spiral, all these things that were sort of coming up every time we had a call. And then all of a sudden it was like, boom, this is where I kind of got my focus when I had this situation. So, board member, was not happy. And, I've said to you before, I have this line that I've stolen from a volunteer, that help is not on the way. Like, it's time to do this, Katie. So I think I did a lot of listening, and ultimately I had to say to the volunteer and say, what do you want to achieve from this? And I was taking away some of the questions that you would ask me from our coaching sessions. And ultimately I said, I've heard you, but what is your end game here? And I was in a tricky spot because it shouldn't have been me that the volunteer was talking to. It should have been the board chair. It was a board issue. And I shared that. I said, you're really putting me in a tough spot. And so here's how I think we can move forward. You have to tell me what the end game is. What is it? If you're looking at the perfect scenario, what is that? And so they were able to share that with me. And I put a lot of steps into place to try to get them to that perfect scenario. And we had an extremely constructive, or what I thought was constructive, meeting. And ultimately the person resigned. Mm-hmm. So I think it was sort of long-winded. I apologize for that. But if I think about how coaching helped me, had that have happened and I didn't have a coach, I wouldn't have been able to listen and had that really been able to ask poignant questions and really speak the truth. But it also would have shaken me when they resigned. It would have shaken me, and it would have really shaken my confidence. And ultimately, I went back to something that you had said to me around another situation where you said, okay, if you look back at this, have you done everything you can do? Have you asked, have you exercised all of the potentialities here? And I said, yeah, I was. Like, I did. I did everything I could do. I wouldn't do anything differently. And so it didn't shake me as I know it would have had I not had the coaching.
That's such a great story, and I think there's so much learning for our folks here. We're not perfect, none of us are perfect, but that space, I think often too, when we're ambitious and we're keeners and we have energy, right, Katie? Mm-hmm. We're going at things gung-ho. We're like, we're jumping hurdles and look at us, and that slow down, that pause, that check-in with ourselves is so important. I'm speaking to myself here, just to be clear, right? Like the check-in, like, is this exactly what I want to do? Is this how I want to be when I have this conversation? What else might be important to me? Because I'd like to think I do better when I talk too, Katie. You're like me. Mm-hmm. I like to think and talk things through. I'm not a person that comes with an idea ahead of the time. And I think those people are particularly inclined towards coaching, to talk, to chew, maybe that's the word, chew.
Yeah. And I think what happens though is in those moments, it's not like, something difficult happened and I could pick up the phone and call you. Not that you weren't available, but I had to be, you have to be self-sufficient. And, sometimes those conversations, it was that ability to sort of take a bit of a breath and handle it in the moment instead of waiting or letting something fester. And that was, I actually remember the exact moment on the phone call where it was like, okay, here you are. This is it. You've got to be the big girl today. And it was good.
Yeah, that number
empowering.
Number 2 to number 1, I think is such an interesting psychological microcosm, because you've actually said it really nicely. The cavalry is not coming to solve it for you.
No.
Right? And I often will say you either, the moments to lead present themselves and you say yes, or they pass you by. Mm-hmm. And we all have different roles to play in this. So as I was preparing for this coaching call, I thought, what like themes from Katie's time would relate to many new leaders? And there were a couple. I'm simplifying a little bit, like, but these are some of them. I wanted to test them on you. So one of them was impatience. That your pace of change is so much faster than everyone else's when you're new. Would you agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so what did that look like? Yeah. Tell me what it looked like in the office.
So I have a lot of energy, right? And it's funny because I do remember this very specific phone call with you where, so 2 things came out of it. One, I came on, I was a bit low energy actually. And I think you noticed that about me right away. And I was like, I haven't done this. I haven't done that. I haven't done this. And you were like, Katie, my goodness, like, look at what you've done. You really need to step back right now. But more than sort of reflecting on myself, I thought, oh my gosh, what have I been doing to my team? And here they are thinking, holy cow, she's really got a lot of energy here. I think we very immediately after went out for like a team social, because I thought, okay, we need to do some celebrating here. And maybe manage my own energy and my own expectations. And the other thing you encouraged me to do at that meeting was to keep a file of my ideas, because I'm an ideas person. I love ideas. And when people come in with ideas, I could talk about ideas all day long. But I don't think it was particularly helpful for my team to have another Katie idea and sort of know which ones I actually wanted to execute and which ones I was just sort of throwing out into the universe to see what traction I got. So that was very helpful. I do keep that file. I keep that little list. And I think my team is very grateful to you for that as well.
I know. And being an ideas person, I think that's such a great point. Like the spitballs, right? So
Yeah.
even labeling, this is a spitball. This is not an idea, like one I want you to take and run with, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Okay, the other one I had, and in many different ways, was like politics, or situating yourself within the bigger ecosystem. That's a big change, right? From number 2 to number 1. That was definitely, would you agree, a theme from your first year?
Absolutely. When I look back at our notes, it was there was always some, mention of it, if not that being, the bulk of some of our conversations. And I think, it really did take me a while to wrap my head around it. And I think it's funny because really ultimately what I decided was I just have to park it and leave it where it is and put my head down and do my work. But I don't want to diminish the value of the fact that we were able to talk through it, because I think it would have remained very cluttered in my mind it would have remained a distraction had I not had the opportunity to talk more about it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for our listeners, we all exist in ecosystems, right? And even though you may feel like you have the right thing, there's just so many more dynamics. And I think people don't realize, I think that us and them thing that starts happening sometimes when you have like senior leadership and everybody else, or board and staff, whatever the us and them looks like. I think we need to, one of my coaches does this thing where he says, walk a day in their shoes, or he says, put the shoes on. Take a minute and put their shoes on. And what do they care about? Right. And it's very different from their shoes, what they care about. And if you can do that, I think that's why fundraisers make great leaders, by the way, because our job is to be empathetic and try and figure out how all the players are feeling. I think that's our superpower. But you might not see that as a, let's call it a senior major gifts officer, looking up at the decisions that are being made up 2 layers above you, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, the politics is my least favorite part of the role too. Right. And so, but it's a critical piece of what we do. And as you climb the ranks, there are conversations that you're a part of that you think, oh, wow, these are really, hard conversations and critical conversations. But yeah, it is a very different dynamic. And so I think, again, coming back to the coaching, that again, because sometimes you can't talk about it openly, and there might be something that you're struggling with, whether you're struggling to understand it or whether it's a, fundamental difference that you have with the decision that's being taken. And, as a leader, you've got to support the decisions that are being made, decide and commit, and we can have a voice, but we all have to come out of here standing together. But having those coaching conversations was my opportunity to sort of hash it out a little bit and then let it go.
Yeah, 100%. And and those are ones that have a linger to them, and it's trying to decide, is this a fundamental clash with my values, or is this just something I don't like, or like to take the time to kind of unpack the onion and really, let's be honest, reconcile it. If it's something you don't have a choice on, you got to be able to sit and live with it, or find a way to reconcile it, because you've got to move forward. You have a mandate. Question. The other one that I was thinking a little bit about that would relate to so many people, and I think you're a great example of it. I'm going to call it like the doing versus the planning, or the push and pull between like today and tomorrow. And in particular, I think about the way you implemented an annual planning cycle that was very effective. Can you speak a little bit? First of all, was it a push and pull, or was that just my perception?
No, I think that's apt. It's very funny. Doing an annual planning day was one of the first things I did when I started. And if I look back at my career, honest to goodness, anytime we had to do an annual planning day, I would groan, roll my eyes. Here we go again, annual planning. And here I find myself in a leadership role. And what's the first thing I do? We're going to do an annual plan, because ultimately, oh, I'm sorry, my lights have gone off. There we go. Ultimately, it's so critical. It's so critical. And I joke, it's the God's honest truth, but I would always come out of those days feeling refreshed and feeling like we had a plan and energized. And so I felt like it was such an important thing for the team. And it's so funny, because now that I look back with the team, they talk about how they didn't see themselves as sort of the owners of their portfolios. And here I came in and just made this assumption and had everyone come in and do this annual planning day. And let me tell you, like, this team showed up. They were so prepared. They were so ready for this kind of direction, I guess, and this ownership of a whole plan. And so it was great. And it was such an interesting perspective to sit on the other side and sort of hear people's ideas and see the amazing strengths of my team as well. So I'm so glad that it happened early on, and it just happened to fall nicely with the fiscal year and the timing of my starting, my beginning the role. It was wonderful to see just the energy coming from them.
Yeah, I love that story. And I'm with you. I'm not I'm more of a feeler than a thinker, right? I work hard on my thinking. So there's probably somebody listening to this podcast who's like rolling their eyes and going, okay, fine, Katie and Jenny, I'll build my operational plan, right?
Yeah, honestly though. And it was like, here we go, guys. Like, we have a roadmap this year. And one of the things I said to them was, this is also your tool to be able to say no. Is it on the list? Then no. Or it's not on the list, but here's what we can take off because I really see value in this. And so it's critical. It really is critical. But definitely a learning curve for me to have to sit back and listen. Again, there's that theme again. Listen and participate, but hear what they had to say and hear what they wanted to do.
Yeah, absolutely, Katie. And if for my listeners, there's one on compassionate leadership with Nate Regier. There's a podcast that just dropped recently. If you are interested in this subject and this whole idea of extreme ownership of portfolios, maybe extremes, that's what they call it in the tech world. It's called extreme ownership, like it's called radical candor. They love big adjectives. But Nate is all about this compassionate accountability. And what he basically says, Katie, is, when you as a team decide what you're going to do, you hold each other accountable because you said, like, we're all interconnected on this team. And so the compassionate thing is to actually hold someone accountable, not to let them off the hook, if I may. So great topic. I mean, I could talk about compassionate accountability all day. I don't know about you. Yeah.
I could talk about anything with you all day, Jenny. But it's a very interesting journey. And it's so funny, right? I sometimes accuse myself of being late to the party. When you talk about compassionate leadership, I'm like, oh yeah, maybe that's, it's funny to look back and sort of label what you were doing. At the end of the day, when I was starting, I wasn't thinking, I really want to be a compassionate leader. Oh, I really want to, be a planner, not a doer. It was sort of following your instincts and following all the things that I think I was taught by the leaders who I admire. And then you look back and you think, oh yeah, okay, I could probably put a label on that. But it's not as strategic as all that.
Yeah. And it's, as you evolve, things change. I don't think we're ever the same leader. I'm not the same leader I was even 3 years ago. So with that, Katie, I have loved this conversation. It's been lovely to be in partnership. And for our listeners, we're still in touch. I mean, that's one of the beautiful things is we can have a personal relationship. We can have a coaching relationship. I consider myself very lucky and very fortunate to have those kinds of clients. So I just want to take a minute to say thank you for coming on the podcast and talking about it.
Thank you so much for having me. I this has been a big journey for me. And I was really hesitant when I took the role. And I hope that if anyone takes anything away from it, it's that you can do this. You can absolutely do this. And more people who have been the, quote unquote number two or in that sort of position, I think should see themselves in these leadership roles because we need great leaders in this industry.
That's amazing. Thank you. How can people get in touch with you, Katie?
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn, or you're welcome to email me. I'm going to give you my personal email address because it's a lot easier to remember and you'll know something by me. It is smalltownkate@gmail.com, and I am happy to receive any and all conversation.
Oh, that's amazing. Smalltownkate@gmail.com. It's wonderful. Thank you again, Katie. Thank you to all our listeners. If you've enjoyed this podcast, if you have a buddy that's contemplating a big move, if you are yourself are thinking about moving from a number 2 to number 1, if you could share this podcast with someone, I really invite you to do that. That means we get more reach here on the podcast. And if you haven't subscribed, please do. I'm not joking. I mean, I'm a hurdle jumper. You heard me say that, and I watch my metrics. I really do take care deeply about which episodes you guys listen to and to bring you more of that. So if you could do those two things, subscribe and share, that would be awesome. And if you have any feedback for myself or for Katie, you know where we are. Delighted to be here and partnering with you all. And with that, I'm going to sign off with my favorite thing to say at the end of a podcast: go be great.